You're Locked on the New York Rangers, your daily podcast on the New York Rangers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, Blue Shirts fans, to episode number 543 of the Locked On New York Rangers podcast. I'm your host, John Chick. Just want to thank you guys for making Locked On New York Rangers your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms. That song you're hearing right now is, of course, Leave the Lights On from our good friends in Passafire. You can check those guys out anywhere you get your music. And today, we got a lot to do. It might not be the longest episode of Locked On New York Rangers that we ever put together here because just kind of a crazy week, and I definitely want to get this episode live before the Rangers are back in action tonight against the Capitals. So we're going to talk about that matchup against the Caps. We're also going to be talking about the Zac Jones, Patrik Nemeth controversy, I think I can call it, because obviously, you know, Nemeth is back in the fold now, and Zac Jones is back in the AHL, much to the chagrin of a lot of Ranger fans, so I'm going to talk about that situation for sure. Rangers have also broken out some new line combinations in practice. We're going to break those down as well, and I'm also going to mention the Tyler Toffoli trade and how that could affect the Rangers, and you'll see what I mean when we get to that subject. But first, like I said, I wanted to start talking about the Zac Jones, Patrik Nemeth situation. For anybody who might not be aware, Zac Jones was sent back down to the AHL. Patrik Nemeth has been back for one game. He played in the Rangers' most recent game, a 2-1 victory in Ottawa against the Senators. And I understand there's a lot of Ranger fans who are upset by this, and I totally get where you're coming from. Zac Jones has overall, I think, in 18 career games with the Rangers, 8 this season, 10 last season, looked pretty good. There's times where, you know, his youth shows, his inexperience shows, there might be a miscue here and there, but for the most part, when you watch this guy go about his business, it seems like he just feels like he belongs at the NHL level, and that translates into how he plays on the ice. And on top of that, you know, you've got this exciting, young defensive pairing, third pairing of Braden Schneider and Zac Jones, and they look darn good playing together over the last couple of games before Patrik Nemeth came back, so I think a lot of Ranger fans naturally got really excited there, and, you know, look at this. We finally have our third defense pairing figured out, and lo and behold, Patrik Nemeth back in the fold, and that means that Zac Jones, at least for the time being, is going to be the odd man out. And again, I get the frustration of Ranger fans. There's a part of me that wants to see Zac Jones and Braden Schneider out there together every single night. But I think the Rangers, they brought in Patrik Nemeth with the idea that he was somebody that could solidify the bottom pairing and kind of be like a stopgap defenseman on this team while the Rangers were waiting for, you know, some of their other guys to come along and develop and prove that they're ready for NHL roles. A good problem to have is something that the Rangers currently have right now, and that's the fact that, you know, a couple of young defensemen, I think, have shown very well for themselves in the NHL. I mean, certainly Braden Schneider, and I think also Zac Jones to a lesser degree. So the Rangers have some young defensemen who are quote-unquote ahead of schedule right now, and that means that Patrik Nemeth has kind of been vilified by this fan base. And to be fair, it's not completely unwarranted because I don't think he's had a great season or anything like that. But Patrik Nemeth is now in the crosshairs of Ranger fans that want to see Zac Jones and Braden Schneider playing together on that third defense pairing, kind of holding down the fort and, you know, turning the page into the next era of Ranger hockey here, so to speak. I mean, there's so many good young defensemen on this team, and it gets to a point where Patrik Nemeth becomes somewhat expendable. For the time being, I'm going to give the Rangers the benefit of the doubt here. I'm going to allow them, you know, again, there's part of me that really wants to see Zac Jones playing with Braden Schneider every single night. But I think the Rangers, again, they committed to Patrik Nemeth in this role. They gave him a 3-year contract. I still think, and it's something that I said even when they signed Nemeth, that he won't end up playing all 3 of those seasons on the New York Rangers. I think he'll be traded long before that contract ever runs out. Partially because, you know, I think there's probably going to be another team that's in the same situation as the Rangers, just looking to acquire a veteran defenseman. And more importantly, I think a lot of these young Ranger defensemen are simply going to eclipse Patrik Nemeth if they have not already, and ultimately make him expendable. And I am going to somewhat generously give Patrik Nemeth and give the Rangers the benefit of the doubt here. I think he deserves another chance. You know, he's a veteran defenseman who, you know, has had a solid career for himself, and I think for the most part, throughout the majority of his career at least, he's been kind of a league-wide average defenseman. So I think he deserves another chance here. He's had a tough season. He's had to deal with some injuries. He's had to deal with a non-COVID related illness. He's had to deal with getting COVID itself. We saw the effect that it had on Mika Zibanejad last season, and Mika Zibanejad is a superstar. And we saw, what a shell he was of himself at the beginning of last season. And of course, after the season was over, we kind of suspected it all along, but we found out definitively that the reason why Mika was struggling so much in the first half of last season was because of his bout with COVID. And that's what it did to a superstar player. Now, Patrik Nemeth is not a superstar player, and obviously it has affected him in a negative way. But here's the way I look at this. The Rangers have played 50 games, having a nice season, obviously, 32, 13, and 5. They have 32 regular season games to go, including tonight's home matchup against the Washington Capitals. Puck drops at 7 p.m. for that. But the way I look at this is Patrik Nemeth is on the clock. He's got to come back, and he's got to play at a higher level than he has throughout the first, more than half of the Rangers regular season here. And he's got to show that he's the Rangers' best option come playoff time. Again, something we've talked about in the past here. The Rangers are in a nice situation in the fact that they are fairly comfortably in the playoff picture right now. The first team that is out of the playoffs is the Detroit Red Wings. They have 52 points. The Rangers have 69 points. So obviously the Rangers have some breathing room, and they can afford to kind of, let Patrik Nemeth try to find his game, try to play his best foot forward, try to play better hockey than we've seen him play thus far in his Ranger career. If he can do that, and he can reestablish himself as a valuable veteran presence on a Ranger blue line that does not have a lot of veterans, then okay, then I think he can be the sixth defenseman going into the playoffs. But if he can't do that, and we get another 5 games into the schedule here, or another 10 games into the schedule here, and Patrik Nemeth is struggling and becoming a liability, or rather, continuing to show himself as a liability, then I think a serious conversation needs to be had here, and you really got to think about bringing Zac Jones back up, putting him into that lineup next to Braden Schneider there, and basically never looking back. And it's a tricky situation. You don't want to embarrass Patrik Nemeth. He's a veteran player, but if there's 6 defensemen that are better options, then those are the 6 defensemen that the Rangers are going to have to roll with. Again, I am happy to give Patrik Nemeth another chance here. It's been a difficult season. Something else about Nemeth that nobody ever really talks about, and I'm not making excuses for him. I'm simply stating a fact here. Yes, he has struggled this season, but he has had to deal with the challenge of basically having a revolving door as far as who his defense partner is going to be on any given night. I mean, think about how many different defensemen Patrik Nemeth has played with. And I'm not making any excuses here. I mean, look, he's the veteran defenseman, right? He's got to be able to roll with the punches and just deal with that and play good hockey no matter who he's paired off with. But, I mean, to just kind of run through the names real quick here as far as everybody he's played with, I mean, you've got Jared Tenorti, you've got Libor Hajek, you've got Zac Jones, you've got Nils Lundqvist, you've got Braden Schneider, you've got Jacob Trouba. In certain situations in the game, a lot of times they're out there killing penalties together, or, if the Rangers have a 1-goal lead late in the game, a lot of times the 2 of them will be out there together in that situation as well. And again, he's got to be able to handle this, but it's a lot. He's played with a lot of different defense partners, and a lot of them have very unique skill sets from one another. So, again, I'm okay with the Rangers giving Nemeth a chance here. It's not like they're barely clinging to their playoff lives and they have to make him a healthy scratch. But again, he's got to show something. He's got to play better than he's played so far this season. And I think if, 3 or 4 or 5 games go by here and Nemeth is showing himself to be a liability and he's just struggling, he can't keep up with the pace of play, then I think the move probably has to be made where you bring Zac Jones back up, you stick him into that spot next to Braden Schneider in the lineup, and you pretty much just never look back. I mean, the future is now, basically, is the situation we'd be looking at. And if that does happen, then I think there could also be a situation where the Rangers make a trade. We've talked about how we expect them to at least make 1 or 2 trades. Maybe as part of a trade, you include Patrik Nemeth in that deal. Now, of course, a rebuilding team is not probably going to be all that interested in Patrik Nemeth, but depending on how, what's going in what direction and what the Rangers are trading and what they're acquiring, you might be able to get away with, if you're the Rangers, including Patrik Nemeth in that deal and basically saying to the team that you're dealing with that, okay, you guys take on his salary, you pay him, we don't really need him anymore because we've got 6 guys who are better. It happened quicker than we thought that it would. We saw a somewhat similar situation a couple years ago when the Rangers traded Mark Stahl and basically just dumped his contract, traded him to Detroit along with a 2nd-round draft pick in order to, again, clear up some cap space and, move on from Mark Stahl. I think that's kind of the situation the Rangers are in right now. Again, I'm fine with Nemeth getting a chance, and for what it's worth, I thought he got a pretty solid game in his first game action playing the Ottawa Senators. That was his first game back into the lineup the other day over the weekend. So, yep, give him a chance, but he's going to have a short leash because Zac Jones, again, played pretty well for himself and seems to have a bright future for himself in this league. And we're going to continue talking about the new Ranger line combinations in just a second. We'll get into some other things as well. Definitely going to preview tonight's matchup against the Washington Capitals. But first, just want to let everybody know that today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by BetOnline.net. Football might be over for this season, but basketball is in full steam for both pro and college hoops. From all the latest trends, odds, totals, player performance props, to where the next fired coach is going to land, BetOnline.net is the #1 spot for all your sports betting needs. BetOnline remains the best spot for all of your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. And it's not just basketball. BetOnline.net is your source for hockey, boxing, UFC odds, right into the Olympic coverage and information. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and action. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, just want to thank everybody for making Locked On New York Rangers your first listen every day. For your next listen, check out the Locked On Now podcast. Nightly recaps of every NHL game with analysis from our local experts. It is free and available wherever you get your podcasts. All right, so as promised, we're going to go ahead and break down the Rangers' new line combinations in practice this week, and we've got the top line staying the same. You've got Mika Zibanejad centering Chris Kreider on the left wing, Alexis Lafreniere on the right wing. You've also got on the second line, Ryan Strome centering Artemi Panarin and Dryden Hunt. The third line is Philip Hedl centering Greg McKegg and Julien Gauthier, and then the fourth line, Kevin Rooney centering Barclay Goodrow and Ryan Reeves, and then you've got Morgan Barron skating as an extra. And let's actually start with Barron, because I know a lot of fans have been kind of clamoring for him to either play or get sent down to the minors. You don't want this guy rotting away in the press box for too long. And this is something that actually came up during a Gerard Gallant press conference just the other day. Friend of the show, Vince Mercogliano, happened to ask Gerard Gallant if sitting Morgan Barron for too long was becoming a concern, and Gallant responded by saying, "I think you're going to see Barron sooner than later." So a little hint that Barron's going to probably work his way back into the lineup for the Rangers. As far as who comes out, I mean, I would think probably Greg McKegg. Either him or maybe Julien Gauthier comes out of the lineup. I would imagine it would almost have to be one of those two players. I don't think you're taking anybody else out of this lineup. I mean, Dryden Hunt, I suppose, could be in the running, but Gallant seems to be a fan of his physicality and what he brings to the table, and obviously Hunt, at least tonight it looks like, is going to be playing in a top six role alongside Artemi Panarin and Ryan Strome. But yeah, I mean, with Morgan Barron, I think for sure it's time to either put him into the Ranger lineup or send him down to the AHL and let him continue to get some more seasoning with the Hartford Wolfpack. And, you know, the Rangers do play 3 games in the next 4 days, so I would imagine, I mean, at least one of these games, Morgan Barron's going to have to be active for one of them. I think he will be. If not, then I think at that point it becomes very, very fair to question why he's even still on the Ranger roster, you know, sitting in the press box every single game. But I think, you know, like Gallant said here, I think we're going to see Barron sooner rather than later. As far as the rest of the lines, I mean, the top line has looked good. And I think Alexis Lafreniere, despite not having any points, you know, in recent games, has benefited from playing with Chris Kreider and Mika Zibanejad. It still feels like Lafreniere sooner or later is going to sort of join the party on that top line and start getting onto the score sheet a little bit more often than he has been this season. I do think eventually that will happen. I mean, how could it not? You're playing with Mika Zibanejad and Chris Kreider, 2 players who have performed at an all-star level. Chris Kreider, of course, was a member of the all-star team, and actually Mika was too. He just couldn't participate in the game itself. Sooner or later, you won't be able to help but see an uptick in your offensive production. So I do think the Rangers should stay patient with Alexis Lafreniere playing with those 2 guys. As far as the second line goes, we've been seeing Barclay Goodrow playing on the right wing for the Rangers there, alongside, of course, Ryan Strome and Artemi Panarin. Goodrow now drops down to the fourth line. You've got Dryden Hunt on the second line with the Rangers. And on one hand, you know, it is fun to see guys like Dryden Hunt and even Barclay Goodrow overachieve and end up carving out a bigger role for themselves than we thought they were going to get. I mean, certainly with Dryden Hunt, we weren't even sure that he was going to be on the NHL roster this season. And with Barclay Goodrow, I mean, great player, but you think of him more as a bottom 6 kind of forward, a defense first kind of a forward, and somebody that, you know, plays physical and establishes a tone. But they've both gotten opportunities to play with Artemi Panarin and Ryan Strome. Unfortunately, you know, you can't help but feel like no matter who the Rangers put there right now, you can't help but feel like they could use an upgrade on the second line right wing spot. And of course, whenever Kaapo Kakko gets back, that will represent an upgrade. But even with Kakko eventually returning, I mean, we've got Alexis Lafreniere playing out of position on the right wing. The Rangers need a right winger. I've maintained this all along. Their biggest target at the trade deadline should be somebody that either predominantly plays right wing or somebody that can at least play the position. Because, and I've mentioned this in the past too, but I think it bears repeating, I think the Rangers would really benefit from going out and trading for a right winger who is just a bona fide sniper, because you look at some of the passes, obviously, that Artemi Panarin makes. You look at some of the passes that Ryan Strome makes. Obviously, a lot of the times, Adam Fox is going to be out there with that line as well. Can you imagine getting, a true bona fide sniper, somebody that can just really let it fly? Can you imagine some of the passes he would be getting and some of the one-timer opportunities that he would receive as a result of playing on this line? Nothing against Barclay Goodrow, nothing against Dryden Hunt. Those two players are not bona fide snipers by any stretch of the imagination, and they can't take advantage of the opportunity of playing with Artemi Panarin and Ryan Strome to the degree that, again, a bona fide sniper would be able to take advantage of that opportunity. And so, again, I think the Rangers, when it comes to the trade market, you're certainly looking at a right winger first and foremost, but ideally it's somebody that can absolutely snipe and maybe step in there on the second line right wing and reap the benefits of playing with Panarin and with Strome. And when Kaapo Kakko comes back, I mean, that's fine. Maybe he takes over that second line right wing spot. Now, whichever player you acquire via a trade can maybe play on the third line, be a sniper down there, give you some secondary scoring that the Rangers have mostly lacked this season. And we will continue breaking down these line combinations in just a second. So the other two Rangers that got moved around the lineup here are Greg McKegg and Barclay Goodrow. McKegg moves up from the fourth line to the third line, and Barclay Goodrow, as we talked about, drops from the second line down to the fourth line. They are both on the left wing. McKegg will be the left wing on the third line. Goodrow will be the left wing on the fourth line. As far as which one should be where, I think it's fine either way. You look at the Ranger third line, and whichever player between McKegg or Goodrow is playing there is going to be sharing the ice with Philip Hedl and Julien Gauthier, two players that are not exactly known for their physicality. So I think for sure, if you're going to have Hedl and Gauthier together, which, I mean, that's pretty much what the Rangers have to do, then I think you definitely want somebody who can, kind of win some board battles, do some of the dirty work, and try to get that third line going a little bit, because they just have not been productive. We've seen different iterations of the third line throughout the season, and depending on who's been there, they've shown flashes from time to time, but the Rangers right now are just not getting the secondary scoring. Hopefully it happens sooner rather than later. I think Philip Hedl has looked good since the All-Star break, and I definitely think it makes sense to have somebody physical playing with Hedl and Gauthier, and they have that in Greg McKegg. I would probably slightly prefer Barclay Goodrow to play there, just because I think he has a little bit more offensive ability. Well, I know that he has more offensive ability than Greg McKegg, and maybe, Goodrow playing some hard-nosed hockey. I mean, Goodrow's got 10 goals this season, so let's not sell him short as far as offense is concerned, but I think Goodrow playing with Hedl and Gauthier might make a little bit more sense. Then again, with Goodrow on the fourth line, your fourth line now looks pretty stacked. You've got Goodrow, Rooney, and Reeves. All three of those guys will hit. They'll throw their weight around. Goodrow maybe adds a little bit more thump to that fourth line as well. And we'll see how it goes. I mean, I'm all for, making this change. Like I said, you look at this lineup, and the thing that really stands out is the Rangers right now just do not have a solution for who plays on the second line right wing spot, but hopefully a solution will be coming in the form of a trade acquisition at some point. Shifting our attention to Rangers versus Capitals tonight. Both teams are going to be very fresh coming into this game. The Rangers have not played since Sunday, and the Capitals have actually not played a game since last Thursday. And that's almost too much time off. I think, that situation kind of favors the Rangers. It's nice to have a little bit of a break every now and then. I don't know that you want a week off. I could see the Capitals maybe being a little bit rusty at the start of this game, and hopefully the Rangers can take advantage of that and start strong, because as we've noted, the Rangers, over their past handful of games, however far you want to go back, say like the last 6 or 7 games or so, I don't think that starting strong has been something that the Rangers have done very often. Now, I do think the Rangers started to rectify that situation in the game against the Senators. I know they gave up an early goal to Tim Stützle, but overall, I still thought they had a better start in that game. It seemed like they had their legs under them. They were focused, and that had actually been a point of emphasis from the coaching staff in the practice prior to that game. So hopefully history can kind of repeat itself here, and the Rangers can once again come out flying tonight and take advantage of a team that hasn't played in a week. And on top of that, get some much-needed payback against this Washington Capitals team who more or less had their way with the Rangers on opening night. Obviously, another question that's going to come up is, do the Rangers do anything regarding Tom Wilson? It's certainly possible, and I know a lot of people were critical of the Rangers for not going after Wilson on opening night, and, I kind of added my 2 cents to that as well. Opening night was rough for the Rangers, but by that same token, you can kind of play the mind games with Tom Wilson. Is somebody going to come after me tonight? Am I going to have to drop the gloves with Ryan Reeves? What's going to happen? We'll see how it shakes out. Obviously, the Rangers still have to keep their head on a swivel as it pertains to Tom Wilson, because you never know when his next atrocity is going to happen. But obviously, we'll keep our eyes on that throughout the night. We'll see if the Rangers end up doing anything there. But I think the biggest thing is let's go ahead and get 2 points off of these guys, because the Rangers are currently in third place in the Metro Division. They have 69 points. They are 4 points ahead of the Washington Capitals. The Rangers also have 2 games in hand on the Capitals, so obviously winning this game would create even more separation, give the Rangers a little bit of breathing room, and help them stay out of fourth place there, because I don't think the Rangers, and I've talked about this in the past, you really don't want to finish in fourth place in this division, because I do think the Carolina Hurricanes are going to win it, and I think that they probably also represent the most difficult first-round playoff matchup, and the Rangers can obviously help their chances of avoiding fourth place with a win here tonight. One other thing that I wanted to talk about here today, and it happened, about a week and a half ago, but I think it bears talking about because I think it could indirectly affect the Rangers and how things go for them at or near the trade deadline this season. And I'm talking about the trade that sent Tyler Toffoli from the Montreal Canadiens to the Calgary Flames. Toffoli was acquired in exchange for 2 draft picks, Tyler Pitlik and Emil Heinmann. Emil Heinmann is a prospect, but the picks that the Flames sent to the Canadiens are their 2022 first-round pick, which will probably be in the top 10, and their 2023 fifth-round pick. The fifth-round pick is kind of small potatoes, but, I looked at this, and I couldn't help but feel like this was kind of a lot to give up for Tyler Toffoli, and I mean, no disrespect to Tyler Toffoli. He is a former Stanley Cup champion with the Los Angeles Kings. He's a solid all-around player. He's played 76 career postseason games, so he had some experience to the Calgary Flames, and I get it from the Flames' perspective as well, because obviously, they're leading their division right now. It's kind of their all-in season. This is Gaudreau's last season. I mean, he's an unrestricted free agent. Maybe he ends up back with them, but he could be on his way, so I get it from the Flames' perspective, and I will bring this back to the Rangers. It'll make sense in a second, but I did feel like this was kind of a lot to give up for Tyler Toffoli, and if a player like Tyler Toffoli is getting you a first-round draft pick, as well as a player in Emil Heinmann, who was himself a former second-round draft pick by the Flames, plus another draft pick, plus another player in Tyler Pitlik. If Tyler Toffoli costs you that much, then I would imagine that players, the big names, the big fish in the sea, so to speak, the guys like JT Miller, the guys like Claude Giroux, the guys like Joe Pavelski, the guys like maybe even Mark Scheifele becomes available, because obviously this season has not really gone as planned for the Winnipeg Jets. I'm still skeptical that they would move him, but you get the idea. I was hoping as a Ranger fan that this might turn into something of a buyer's market this season, and I honestly thought that it could, because when you look around the NHL right now, you look at the standings, and this is especially true of the Eastern Conference, but it's true of the NHL as a whole. It seems like, there are teams that are at one extreme or the other. They're either definitely going to be in the playoffs, or close to definitely going to be into the playoffs, or they are hopelessly buried in the standings. If you look at the Eastern Conference, we've talked about this in the past as well, the 8 playoff teams, there's a great divide between them and where they are in the standings, as compared to the 8 teams that are not in playoff position in the Eastern Conference. In the Western Conference, it's not quite as extreme, but there's 4 teams right now that I think you can pretty much dig their grave. I mean, the Coyotes and Blackhawks, no chance as far as playoffs are concerned. The Kraken, no chance. And I would even throw the Sharks into that. The Sharks got off to a nice start this season, but they've only won 1 out of their last 10 games, and they're sinking like a stone in the sea. So, there's 12 teams right now that it looks like certainly going to be on the outside of the playoff picture looking in. And I just thought, given the fact that there are so many teams that might look to be sellers, that the teams that are buyers might have a little bit of an edge. They might be able to get guys for less than they might have been able to get them in different seasons, or less than they might have been able to get them if the standings were a little bit tighter than they currently are. But when you see Tyler Toffoli get the kind of return that he got for the Montreal Canadiens, I thought the Canadiens got a nice haul there, and I suppose it makes sense for both teams. If you're the Flames, maybe you're a little willing to overpay just a bit, given the fact that you're pushing all your chips in and going for a Stanley Cup this season, but be that as it may, that felt like a lot, and I think it kind of set the stage for, teams having to give up a lot to acquire pieces at the trade deadline, and that might go for the Rangers as well. And that's why, again, I've talked about how I think the Rangers are probably looking more at like a middle six type forward. I don't see them being big time players for the top tier guys that could and likely will be available at the trade deadline this season. Just food for thought, and we'll continue to cover the trade deadline as we have on here. There's a couple other targets that I wanted to mention as it pertains to the Rangers, and we'll get to them in due time. But that will do it for today, guys. Once again, if you'd like to get in touch with this podcast, please send an email to lockedonnyrangers@gmail.com. Once again, that is lockedonnyrangers@gmail.com. Definitely give us a follow on Twitter as well, at @LO_NY_Rangers. Once again, that is at @LO_NY_Rangers. Thanks again, guys. I'll see you next time. Thanks for making Locked On New York Rangers your first listen every day. In our next episode, we are going to be breaking down everything that happens between the Rangers and the Capitals tonight. Now make your second listen Locked On Fantasy Hockey. Hosts Steele Rodine and Flip Livingston help you become the expert of your fantasy league. It is free and available wherever you get your podcasts.